Welcome everybody. Today's class is a Dreamwork Series. My name is Jessie and I'm on the Access Elite team that brought this event to you today. For those of you who have logged on to one of our events before, welcome back. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, Access Elite is a health and wellness company that provides on-demand wellness content, same-day prescription delivery, and facilitates live virtual events such as these, as well as much more. We at Access Elite are so glad to facilitate this event and bring a little bit of positivity and connection to your day. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today. Lisa Sarami is a marriage and family therapist, meditation guide, and yoga instructor. So with that, Lisa, you can take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Jessie. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here so we can get to the juicy dream content. As always, it's such a pleasure to be here and to be working with Access Elite. Today we are in the third session of I think it was a 5-week series on dreams. And so we're going to be focusing, let me just go to the next slide, today on what the 4-step approach is with dream work, connecting to our inner dynamics, bringing in inner reflections of dream images, and then the symbolism of our inner scape and how that's all illuminated through dream. We are following this book called Inner Work by Robert Johnson. And he breaks down not only how to do this 4-step approach with dream work, but also with another practice called active imagination. It's a really great book and I highly recommend it. You can get it for less than $15 on Amazon. So last week, we focused on the first step of the 4-step approach when it comes to dreams, which was making associations. Sorry, it wasn't last week, it was 2 weeks ago. And for those of you that were with us, I recommended working with that very first step over the next couple weeks until now, so that when we come together, you have that foundation laid. And if not, that's okay. You can just start whenever you're ready. The associations was kind of like a mind mapping, where in a dream you might have an image, and that image has a lot of symbolism, which we're going to talk about more today. That first step of making association just allows us to start to open up the inquiry of the symbolism of the images that might show up in our dreams. Now, as we move into the second step, we're now going to connect those images to our inner dynamics. So this approach that Robert Johnson brings, it's connected to Jungian psychology, depth psychology, and it really looks at dreams not so literally, but more from a place of how the images have a lot of symbolism. And that's, we're going to dive into today, is how does that symbolism get illuminated within ourselves. So inner dynamics. So our selves are made up of many, many, many different parts. And in our dreams, we're going to start to dive into how these different parts will show themselves through the images and through the symbolism, which is a very personal thing. So what the image might be for one could be totally different for another, as far as when we start to dive into the interpretation of the images. The images allow us to figure out what's going on inside of ourselves, what's being represented in the inner scape by the situation of the dream. So today you'll see a lot of questions, and these are the types of questions you want to kind of ask yourself when we're looking at these different images. So when you have a dream, let's say, I'm just going to use the image of an eagle. Let's say you have a dream and the eagle's in your dream. The question would be, what part of that is me? Or what part of me is that? So let's think about an eagle. There's some general connections to what an eagle might symbolize. So I'm going to use those general connections just for our example, but for you personally, if the eagle represented something differently, you would use that interpretation. But let's say in this particular example, that the eagle is representing freedom. The eagle is representing perspective, to be able to have a higher perspective. So you might then ask yourself, where have I seen this functioning in my life lately? And where do I see that same trait in my own personality? In fact, who is it inside of me who feels like or behaves like that? So if you had a dream about an eagle and we were using the symbolism of perspective and freedom, then one might look at the presenting situation in their life and to see where maybe some of that symbolism would be represented in what they are facing. So as we went over in our very first session, which was a few weeks back, whoops, I think this just moved. Yeah. Dreams are really a representation of what's going on in our insides. And what's going on in our insides isn't always conscious, which is something that we talked about a few weeks back. And why it's not conscious is because sometimes it's shadow material that we aren't ready to face, whether it's positive or negative. Shadow material can be something about ourselves that we're not ready to own, or it could be unrealized potential that we haven't tapped into. So tying it back to the dream, it's like, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine had a few dreams the other night, and it was all related to work. And it makes sense because that person was coming back from a vacation and was having to go back to work and face all the issues that they were facing at work. However, when we started to really dive into the dream, the images that were coming forward that had to do with work in reality didn't have a direct connection to where the dream was coming from. The dream was showing the images that were related to work. However, when we started to really look at each one of those images and get into this second step of seeing where is the inner symbolism of these images, we were able to make more of the story and of the meaning as to what was happening in this individual's innerscape or unconscious. So the dream ultimately is a kind of a snapshot of our inner process of individuation. And so what is individuation? Again, we went over that a few weeks ago, but if you missed that or you didn't remember, no big deal. Individuation really is our journey to our wholeness, that integration of ourselves fully, like the yin and the yang, and it happens through a lifetime. So through the Jungian lens, through the depth psychological lens, they're saying that these dreams, as we're taking these little snapshots as we go through life and we use the images of our dreams, we are able to take a look at our own individual process of individuation and have a deeper understanding of where we're at and what we need. So almost every thought, every reaction, every decision, and every relationship that we have is a result from our inner qualities and our inner dynamics. And our dreams are a portal to really accessing deeper understanding and meaning of these dynamics. The unconscious literally speaks with image, so it's just borrowing images for the dreams. And the symbolism is very, very personal. So when we want to dive into the symbolism, so if you have any images that you've been working with, this is a good time to bring maybe one of them to mind, some more questions. With that image, like what traits do you have in common with the person or image, I'll say, in the dream? What are the main characteristics? Hold on, I think I might have. Nope, okay, that was right. Okay, so the reason I got confused was the language of person. So when we identify an image in the dream, we begin to, as I said earlier, we are made of different parts. And I like to actually, suggest that each one of these parts are like an individual person within ourselves. And so when you see person in these inner reflections, it's a way for us to be more connected to the archetypal patterns of different inner personalities that we might have. So that might all sound a little confusing, but I promise you that we all have an inner critic. So if you think about that voice in your head, the inner critic that is always judging and assessing the way you do things, the way you don't do things, that is an example of how a person would exist within us that is a part of us, but it's not all of us. And when that inner critic takes over, it really can feel dominating, and it can really feel belittling, where we belittle ourselves. That's an example of one type of person or character that might show up through your dreams, right? We have different parts. So when we're looking at the images, we're looking at the symbolism of those images to help identify that part or that personality that is alive within us and within our unconscious. So what are the traits that we have in common? And what are the main characteristics? How would you describe this character and this personality? And then where do you see those aspects within yourself? So again, using an eagle, for example, maybe, the eagle is a representation of your desire for freedom, your desire for higher perspective, your desire to be free, and that some of the characteristics that an eagle portrays may live within yourself. And you would really start to describe this character almost as though you were going to write out a character for a play or a movie. And then we make it personal. How do we see those characteristics living within ourselves? And then right now, as they're showing up in our dreams, what is trying to be communicated through their arrival? So back to the dream images, which obviously is a very big piece since it's the language of the psyche and the unconscious. The other thing is our dreams speak in extremes. So if you've had a dream and it's just felt heavily loaded, where you've woken up activated, maybe it was a nightmare, knowing that when you're working with those images, the dream and the unconscious is trying to get your attention. And so sometimes things are exaggerated in dreams. And only you can say what part of you is represented in the symbolism. As I said earlier, it's a lot of our shadow content or shadow material. And really what that means is it's the positive qualities that are unfulfilled in our lives, or maybe some of our negative qualities that we don't want to look at that will show up through our dreams. And they really show the truth around our beliefs, our values, and our attitudes. In fact, your dreams are the best reporters of your unconscious patterns of behavior. So just as you see on this slide, all of these different images might mean something different for someone. And I'm going to use the image of the home on the lower right-hand side because, for one person, maybe that home is their home. Maybe it's a parent's home. Maybe it's a vacation home. But home usually represents some type of container when it shows up through symbolism and dream. And depending on what home that represents for the individual is going to determine the actual symbolism. And when we get into more of the interpretation next week, you'll see how it's going to make a really big difference, and it's going to influence the interpretation heavily. So some more questions as we're working with the image and the symbolism. Where have I seen this person working in my life lately? Where in my life have I seen them doing what they're doing in the dream? So a lot of the work when I work with individuals, especially if you're having kind of repetitive dreams, and I don't mean the images are repetitive, but maybe the feelings are repetitive or the patterns of the dream are repetitive. And what they're doing is they're illuminating patterns within our own lives that maybe we don't want to face and we don't want to look at. It gives us a way to kind of metabolize that information our dreams do. What part of me is it that feels or thinks or acts or behaves that way? So, as I said earlier, you might find that your dream person is a manifestation of an internal personality structure and always looking to illuminate that shadow. So I really encourage something that I do with a lot of my clients is something called personification in a depth psychological lens. And what we do is we take that image and we begin to personify it. And one of the ways you do that is literally by giving it a name, giving it a description, so that you're bearing witness to it rather than feeling overwhelmed by it. As I mentioned last time, you know, dreams are really fun. It's like we have these crazy dreams and we wake up and we're like, what does that mean? What is that supposed to mean? But when we actually start to do the dream work, there is a little bit of work involved, and it really requires us to be, one, courageous, right? Because if that shadow material in our unconscious is in the unconscious, it's there for a reason. And so it's something that takes our courage to integrate and digest in. It takes being open and really being curious, not coming in with preconceived notions, but really being open and curious to what the unconscious is trying to reveal. It requires us to slow down and to be patient. I smile big on this one because it's not something I'm very good at, patience, but it definitely takes a little bit of patience. It takes our care, our tenderness. You know, dreams are really sacred, and that material that's in our unconscious is also very sacred. It's hidden, right? It's like this mystery. So meeting it with care and our willingness to meet it is really, really important. And when we get into the fourth step of ritual, you'll see how it really adds and expands on the interpretation in dream work. And then being in a supportive environment. If you're facing some of the stuff that you haven't wanted to face, you don't want to be in an environment that's going to make you feel very raw and vulnerable. Maybe it's best to hold off on that dream interpretation, or making sure that you're doing it in a facilitated way, something I do with a lot of my clients, so that it's supported and it's safe, so that you can really integrate in that which has been suppressed into that bottom layer of the iceberg, as you can see in the image to the right. The way I work with clients is I use yoga and I use depth psychology. The yoga comes in because it's a really great way to increase a person's sense of agency, ability to resource themselves and find safety within themselves, to increase their body awareness and psychological awareness, to then move into deeper work that depth psychology holds as an opportunity for one's transformation, one's individuation, and dream work is one of those things: active imagination, personification, doing work with art, as well as working with myth, metaphor, and symbol. I'd just like to open it up. If anybody has any questions, or has any questions even specifically around maybe some images that they're working on or anything like that, I wanted to just open the space up for that. You can use the chat box like we have in the past.
I have a question, actually.
Okay, great, Jessie.
When you were talking about the inner dynamics and identifying symbols, does it only depend on what you find symbolism in that object, or are there any that are staples across the board?
So in the first step, which I don't think you were here when we did the first step, but is word association. So let's say I'm going to use the eagle as an example again. let's say the image you decided to work with was the eagle, you would put the eagle down and you would, you know, draw bubbles or in lines to different associations that might come with the eagle. And then in this step, the inner dynamics is exactly what you said. It's then looking at eagle and seeing where is that connected as like a reflection of myself, of my inner self. Or what's happening. You know, it could be that somebody's feeling like, I'm using freedom as an example, because the eagle sometimes could be associated with that. Now, if somebody else had a different experience with an eagle and it had, let's say, a negative connotation to it or some other type of connection to it, then that symbolism would shift. And when we're doing the dream work, we would want to really look at what is that inner reflection of that image coming up for that person specifically. What does the eagle symbolize? So that when we get into the next step, we can actually interpret it fully and personally and individually for that person.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or images that maybe, or dreams that anybody's been working with? You can just put it in the chat box. Oh, I see something. Let me look really quick here. Oh. So that's a good question. So the question was, if you see the same animal consistently, is there an association attached to it? And do certain animals have certain meanings? So last session, I was talking about rats. And so I think that, you know, the animals can have different meanings for different peoples. That's like the symbolism piece of it. But there are certain symbolisms that I think live in the collective, right? So with the rats, for example, survival is something that's symbolic. Like when I'm working with clients and let's say they have repeated images, in this case you're asking about an animal, I would definitely say there's an association to it, and then how a person would feel or define that connection is really the better way to say it, is then to personalize when they see that animal, what does that animal represent for them? They might have a history with that animal, and then there's stuff that lives in the collective, and then that might show up, right? Because if it lives in the collective, that idea of freedom with an eagle or survival with a rat, or courage with a lion, for example, then of course, over time, we have we have also incorporated that symbolism into our own connections with that animal, correct? So it's very personal. And then if the animal keeps showing up, I definitely feel like it's trying to say something, right? If you're having the same dream or pattern of dream happening over and over and over again, there's something that's wanting to be integrated into your psyche, and it's not happening, right? So it's showing up in the dreams. Julia, did that help answer your question? Okay, perfect. And so one other thing I want to say about that, when I'm working with clients, the temptation is to just get on the internet and to find those collective symbolisms. What I'll really encourage them to do is to, before they do that, is to just sit with themselves, give themselves that patience and that time and the courage to really look to see what is it that makes it personal for me, that this animal or image keeps showing up. Then if you'd like to expand on that and look at the collective connections out there, and you want to use the internet to do that, of course, you know, that might help you deepen and expand as well. But through the Robert Johnson approach, if you get the book and you're reading it, he really discourages looking into the exterior. Perfect. Thanks, Julia. Any other questions that anyone might have regarding, okay. What symbolized a watch or clock? Hunting clock, but broken. So a clock or a watch, of course, would be associated in my mind with time. So I would ask you, when you think of this particular watch or clock, is there any particular associations that show up for you, or internal reflections? What's your relationship to time? And then you had added Kyoko, I think, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. It was broken and hanging. So for me, what shows up, okay? So then you want to see, does this resonate for you? What clicks? Because you'll feel a charge. You'll be like, oh yeah, this is the thing. What is your relationship to time? And is the broken piece of the clock or the hanging piece of the clock connected to that relationship to time that you might have internally? And the richness of a dream is, it's as we started, I said, pick 3 to 5, right? So you might, images that are showing up in your dream. So for example, Kyoko, if you have a clock that's showing up, and then maybe there's 3 or 4 other images that you also have, by looking at each one of these images and then looking at how they're symbolized within your own inner personality, will help as we move into our next step in the interpretation of what is trying to be communicated in the dream. Did that help at all? She's on her iPhone, so who knows? It might be hard to type. Can you speak? Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, my dream last night, I saw this hanging clock, and I couldn't reach. So someone took this hanging clock, and when this clock came in front of me, it was spider net was also, surrounded by their clock. And spider.
Yeah. Okay.
And someone tried to fix it, and I saw inside the clock, the parts was not moving correctly, I think. That's the dream stopped. And then in the same place, I was talking with the guy, and I served the coffee, but I felt that uncomfortable to talking with that person, and jump into another scene, say I missed the train, and I was supposed to go to some place, unknown place, and the language was not English, but I think that was Italian language speaking place. So the parts was not really like a story. It's a parts, all parts. So I don't know how can I describe it. How can I
work with it?
Yes. So how can I approach? Yes.
This is your one-time dream, right? Not
last night.
What I would maybe do is pick the images that like stick out the most. So for example, you mentioned the clock several times. Definitely the clock, maybe the spiders, maybe the piece of it being broken. It almost sounded like you had 3 different scenes.
Yes.
Right. So the other item that I was thinking would help in the interpretation is the train. That's on a very surface level. It feels like If we were to dive deeper and start to find the associations and maybe the inner reflections, that maybe there's something happening on the inside in your relationship to time, your schedule. The train is like transportation. It's like, it doesn't necessarily mean you physically getting somewhere, but maybe it could mean something maybe with your career, moving, you know, something in a particular direction. And the reason I bring up the relationship to time, because you brought up the clock, and then something being broken in all of that. It would take a little more time and work together.
No, I think you are correct because, I tell you, because I got laid off 2 weeks ago, and that is fine because I was always thinking about something new I want to do it, which is healing or metaphysical healing particularly. And so I'm just started thinking of maybe I can do this kind of job or consultation, stuff like that. But I don't know how or where to start. So probably that's related to that dream. I don't know. I need to find out.
When you think about, so in the unconscious, a lot of what shows up in our dreams and a lot of what's in the unconscious is shadow. And when most people hear shadow, they think, oh, it's all the stuff I don't want to look at. And that's true. You know, there are things that we don't want to look at about ourselves. We all have a shadow. But there's also this really beautiful stuff in our shadow that's our unrealized potential. And so it's like we're scared to look at that too. It reminds me of Marianne Williamson's quote. She does this quote about fear. And what she speaks to is that we're so afraid of our bigness, you know, and I think of that as the shadow material. It's that part of us that just wants to like express its purpose in this world, and yet we want to keep it small for some reason.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very helpful. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Anyone else? Well, great, you guys. And also, I just want to put out there, through Access Elite, I do offer some discounted pricing. If you have something that maybe, you know, you wanted to work on and you didn't feel this time and place and platform was appropriate, I would love to explore it with you personally. And Jessie will let you know how to do that through the app. Jessie, I think you're muted. I'm not sure if you're.
Oh,
there you are.
hey.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. That was super cool. Thank you, Lisa, and everybody for joining us today. So if you love today's class, you can sign up for her next class and view all of our other options on our website at accesselitenow.com/pricing. And should you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Put my email in the chat, or check out the website at accesselitenow.com. Thank you, everybody, and thanks, Lisa. Hope you all have a great day.
Thank you. See you next time.